Imagine you're scrolling through your social media feed, and you come across a post from the President of the United States. It's not a policy speech or a rally clip. It's a raw 30-second video showing a boat on the open ocean. Suddenly, there's a violent explosion. Fire erupts, and the vessel is engulfed, sinking into the dark water. The caption calls it a kinetic strike against extremely violent narco-terrorists. The president later tells reporters to just look at the cargo scattered across the sea. Big bags of cocaine and fentanyl everywhere. The message is clear. This is a decisive victory in the war on drugs. But then, the picture starts to get complicated. From Caracas, another president, Nicolas Maduro, calls it an act of aggression and a bomb threat. Legal experts begin to whisper, questioning whether blowing up a ship in international waters, killing 3 people, is even legal. A few days earlier, a similar strike killed 11. The Venezuelan government responds by flying 2 F-16 fighter jets over a U.S. Navy destroyer. Suddenly, that 30-second clip isn't just a simple video of a drug bust anymore. It's the flashpoint in a rapidly escalating conflict between 2 nations, a single explosion at sea that raises a much bigger question. Was this a legitimate counter-narcotics operation or an act of war? Wow, that opening really throws you right into the deep end, doesn't it? It sets the stage perfectly for what we're exploring today.
It really does. It's so visceral.
We're going to unpack this whole incident. And, in doing that, we'll touch on international law, definitely the geopolitical games being played, and maybe most importantly, the real people caught in the middle.
Yeah, the human element.
Our mission, I guess, is to try and figure out what's really going on when something that looks like law enforcement suddenly starts to feel, well, a lot more like conflict. Yeah. Pushing those boundaries.
It's fascinating and frankly a bit disturbing how quickly that term kinetic strike, which sounds very military against so-called narco-terrorists, just unravels.
Right.
That image the president shared, the sinking boat, the scattered drugs. Mm-hmm. It's meant to be simple, a clear win.
Proof positive.
But the minute you scratch the surface, the official story gets, well, messy. You start questioning the intent, the legality, the actual consequences.
And that brings us straight to the human cost, beyond the official narrative. We heard this really powerful story about a fisherman from the Paria Peninsula in Venezuela. We're calling him Julio. His family, they'd fished those waters for generations. It was their life. But the economy in Venezuela, it just collapsed. Fishing wasn't paying the bills anymore.
A familiar story for many there, unfortunately.
Totally. So Julio faced this terrible choice. Basically, poverty or taking a huge risk. He agreed to transport a, quote, special package for what amounted to 2 years' worth of fishing income. He knew about the U.S. warships out there, saw them. It was a constant worry.
So he knew the danger.
Absolutely. Then one night, moonless sky, his boat, the Esperanza, gets targeted by a U.S. drone, and boom.
Oh, man.
Julio and 2 others killed, just like that. Became a statistic in an operation celebrated somewhere else as a victory. It's stories like this, they force you to look past the press releases.
That story, Julio's story, it really underscores a vital point, doesn't it? These aren't just abstract operations against faceless narco-terrorists.
No.
They hit real people, families, communities, and it forces us to ask some really fundamental questions. Legally, morally?
Like, was his boat even a legitimate target, especially out there in international waters?
Exactly. International waters are, generally speaking, open sea, not owned by any one country. So hitting a vessel there raises huge questions. And how do we balance stopping drug trafficking, which is obviously important, with basic rights, due process, even for suspects?
Yeah, that's the rub.
When you have a military strike acting as judge, jury, and executioner all at sea, well, that fundamentally challenges international law, principles designed to protect people.
And the justification is often imminent threat, right? Based on intelligence we never see.
Precisely. Which makes it incredibly hard for anyone outside to assess if it was truly legal or ethical. It's not just about definitions, it's about how nations behave, how they uphold justice beyond their own borders.
Which really brings us to that core question, doesn't it? When does something done in the name of law enforcement cross that line and become what international law might see as an act of war? That's the legal maze we need to get through.
It really is a labyrinth. And in international law, you've basically got 2 key frameworks operating side by side. They're distinct but connected. Super important to grasp this.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, there's jus ad bellum, Latin for the law on the use of force. This governs when a state can legally use armed force against another state. Think of it as the rules for starting a war.
Got it. Reasons for war.
Then you have jus and bello,
Yeah.
or international humanitarian law, IHL. This dictates how war must be fought once it's started. It doesn't care who started it or why.
Ah, so conduct during war.
Exactly. It's purely humanitarian. Its only goal is to limit suffering and conflict. And crucially, it applies equally to everyone involved, regardless of whether their cause is considered just or not.
Okay, so I think I'm getting this. Even if a country thinks it has a perfectly good reason to act just ad bellum the way it acts, is judged by a whole separate set of humanitarian rules, jus and bello.
You got it.
And messing up the how can make the whole thing illegal or unethical, no matter the original justifications, like dual accountability.
That's a great way to put it. Just ad bellum is really restrictive. It tries to limit force between states to very specific exceptions, primarily self-defense against an actual armed attack, or if the UN Security Council authorizes it.
Right.
And IHL needs to be independent of that. Think about it. If applying humanitarian rules depended on, for instance, deciding who the bad guy was who started it.
It would never get applied. Everyone would just blame the other side.
Precisely. It would paralyze the system. The whole point of IHL is to protect victims of war-wounded soldiers, prisoners, civilians, regardless of which side they're on. That's why jus and bello has to stand apart from just ad bellum. It's about maintaining some humanity even when things get ugly.
Okay. And what about self-defense? That's one of the exceptions you mentioned for using force. What are the rules around that? It can't just be a free-for-all.
Absolutely not. It's heavily constrained. To lawfully use force in self-defense, you have to meet two key tests: necessity and proportionality.
Necessity and proportionality. Okay.
And while people often talk about them separately, they're actually really intertwined in the bigger picture. Necessity means force must be the only way to stop an immediate unlawful threat. No other options left.
Right. Last resort.
And proportionality, in this just ad bellum context, means the scale and intensity of your military action have to be genuinely appropriate to stop that specific threat. It's about tailoring the response.
So, going back to Julio's boat, was blowing it up really necessary? Was it proportional just to stop that one package?
Those are exactly the right questions within this framework.
Yeah.
Was that level of force the minimum required? And critically, the law tries to stop people from saying, well, the war was justified, so anything goes during the fighting.
Gotcha.
This integrated approach, thinking about necessity and proportionality together, forces a much more careful calculation. It's designed to prevent using the just bellum justification, the why, as an excuse for violating just as and bello rules, the how. The how is always judged on its own terms.
This leads us right back to the legality of blowing up a ship in international waters. Not in a country's own backyard, but out on the open sea. What does maritime law say?
Yeah, this is where it gets incredibly complicated and, frankly, often disputed. The main rule book is the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS.
UNCLOS, okay.
It defines international waters, the high seas, as areas beyond any national control. All countries have freedoms there, like sailing ships or flying planes.
Freedom of the seas.
But with freedoms come responsibilities. Generally, a country can't just interfere with another country's ship on the high seas. There are exceptions, of course: piracy, slave trading, illegal broadcasting.
Standard stuff.
Right. But for something like the Esperanza, the questions are huge. Was it legally a pirate ship? Probably not. Was it stateless, meaning no country's flag? That gives more leeway, but we don't know. If it was flying a Venezuelan flag, that brings sovereignty into play.
So normally you'd need Venezuela's permission to board it out there.
Generally, yes. Or a specific treaty allowing it, or a UN Security Council resolution. Just going in unilaterally, especially with a destructive kinetic strike that kills people, without that clear legal basis, that's a major challenge to international law. It could easily be seen as aggression or an unlawful use of force.
We've seen similar fuzziness in other places, right? Like the South China Sea.
Absolutely. That's a prime example of these complexities. You have multiple countries claiming the same waters, taking actions in disputed zones, sometimes based on shaky legal claims.
Like China using its maritime militia.
Exactly. They use vessels that look civilian but act with state backing, blurring the lines. They harass other ships, sink fishing boats, build artificial islands, all to assert control in ways that challenge UNCLOS. They might claim they're operating legally, maybe based on zones around artificial islands that aren't entitled to such zones. It highlights how states can operate in these gray areas, pushing boundaries, much like the question swirling around the strike on the Esperanza.
And this really gets us into that concept of the gray zone conflict. It sounds like it's all about operating in the shadows, legally speaking, pushing limits without starting an actual war. What exactly is this gray zone?
You've nailed it. The gray zone is all about deliberately exploiting or even creating uncertainty. Legal uncertainty, political uncertainty, operational uncertainty, all for strategic gain.
Okay.
It's marked by ambiguity. Is it law enforcement? Is it military action? Who are the actors involved? Are the state agents or not? What rules even apply here? The whole point is to pursue goals using a mix of tools, economic pressure, information campaigns, cyber stuff, maybe some deniable kinetic actions, but keeping it all below the threshold that would trigger a big conventional military response.
So it's gradual pressure, not a knockout blow.
Exactly. Incremental steps. Chip away at the adversary, test their red lines, achieve objectives without the massive costs and risks of open warfare.
So how do countries actually operate effectively in this, well, murky space?
It takes a lot of finesse and maybe a tolerance for risk and ambiguity. We see tactics like using those ambiguously marked vessels, like militias, or claiming legitimate reasons for being somewhere like sheltering from a storm or doing research while actually doing something else, like spying or challenging navigation rights.
Dancing cover stories?
Pretty much. These tactics really strain the traditional legal frameworks we have for peace and war. Frameworks mostly built after World War II. They don't fit neatly into the boxes.
Yeah.
And that ambiguity allows states to push their interests, probe weaknesses, and wear down an opponent without escalating into a full-blown conflict. It's a very sophisticated and often risky kind of statecraft.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. These strikes, these incidents, they aren't just isolated events or legal puzzles. There's a bigger picture here, a geopolitical strategy that seems to go way beyond just stopping drug boats.
Absolutely.
We heard from a former U.S. Coast Guard officer, Lieutenant Miller. He was serving in the Caribbean when things were really tense, and he described this distinct shift. Briefings started sounding less like, police work catching smugglers and more like military planning. Directives to actively disable boats, intercept them forcefully.
A change in tone and tactics.
Definitely. And the crucial thing he noticed, the targets became almost exclusively Venezuelan ships.
Ah, okay. That's significant.
It led him to believe it wasn't just about drugs anymore. It was about constant, relentless pressure, making the sea itself hostile territory for any Venezuelan vessel, drug runner or not.
Lieutenant Miller's perspective really highlights how these counter-narcotics ops can be, well, dual purpose or maybe multi-purpose.
Right.
The public goal is stopping drugs getting to the U.S. Fair enough. But strategically targeting Venezuelan vessels, that's a clear projection of power. It's a form of economic pressure, maybe even warfare, really.
How so?
By disrupting their commerce, whether it's illicit drugs or potentially legitimate trade, you squeeze the Maduro regime. You make it harder for them to function, harder to get resources. It creates instability.
Potentially fueling internal opposition.
That could be part of the calculation. And crucially, it gives the U.S. a reason, a justification fighting crime, to maintain a heavy military and intelligence presence right there in Venezuela's neighborhood, a strategically vital area.
So it fits that description of hybrid warfare?
Exactly.
Right.
Blending military, economic, diplomatic, information tools, all aimed at achieving political goals against a rival, using the war on drugs as a convenient and internationally somewhat accepted cover.
It makes more sense when you look at Venezuela's own history with the drug trade. It's a long, complicated, and apparently worsening story.
It really is. Venezuela was always a transit route, mainly for Colombian cocaine heading north to the U.S. or east to Europe. Through the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico, direct sea routes.
But something changed.
The big shift happened around 2005. That's when Venezuela kicked out the USDEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, accused them of spying.
Okay, so less U.S. presence.
Right. And with the DEA then partnering more closely with Colombia next door, Venezuela arguably became more attractive for traffickers. Less oversight, maybe a more permissive environment.
And the volume increased.
Seems so. By 2012, reports suggested most drug flights out of the border area near Colombia were landing in Honduras. A couple of years later, the routes shifted more towards Caribbean islands. Our sources suggest by 2015, maybe a third of all South American cocaine was passing through Venezuela, up from perhaps a quarter just 5 years earlier.
Wow, that's a huge share. So it went from just transit to being a major hub.
It certainly looks that way, a much deeper involvement in the trade itself.
And it wasn't just independent cartels operating freely. There have been these persistent, serious allegations about the government itself being involved, this cartel of the Suns.
Yes, those allegations are incredibly serious and have been around for years. Since at least 2012, the U.S. government was describing Venezuelan security forces as generally permissive, basically looking the other way.
Or worse.
Or worse. And the political environment is deeply corrupt. This made it a preferred route. We're talking major players operating there. Mexican cartels like El Tren de Aragua, Los Zetas, Sinaloa, Colombian groups like the FARC and ELN guerrillas, apparently even elements of the Italian mafia. And the allegations go right to the top, describing high-ranking government and military figures as essentially running a criminal organization. The Cartel of the Suns, Cartel de los Soles, is the name given to this alleged network within the state. Diosdado Cabello, a very powerful figure, former military man, president of the National Assembly, has often been named.
And then there was that really shocking incident involving President Maduro's own family, the narco sobrinos case.
That's right, the narco nephews.
Right.
That hit in 2015. Maduro's nephews, Efrain Campo Flores and Francisco Flores de Freites, were arrested by the DEA in Haiti, of all places.
What were they doing?
Trying to arrange a deal to ship 800 kilos of cocaine to New York, allegedly using diplomatic passports.
Diplomatic passports.
Yes. And allegedly getting help from Venezuelan military personnel, even flying out of a presidential hangar. Reports later surfaced of more drugs found in the Dominican Republic linked to them. When arrested, realizing they didn't actually have diplomatic immunity for this, they apparently started naming names.
Implicating others.
Allegedly implicating top officials like Cabello and Tarek El Assami, another powerful governor. They were eventually convicted in the U.S. Prosecutors argued the drug money was intended to help keep their family in power. For many, this was concrete proof of state complicity at the highest levels.
And the connections don't stop there. We've heard about links to Colombian armed groups, even groups like Hezbollah.
It gets even more complex, yes. Back in 2008, the U.S. Treasury accused senior Venezuelan officials of helping the FARC with their drug trafficking. While the OAS Secretary General initially downplayed it, a U.S. Congress report the next year said corruption in the Venezuelan military was actively facilitating FARC trafficking.
So conflicting reports, but the accusations persisted.
They did. Then in 2012, a Venezuelan Supreme Court judge, Eladio Aponte, was kicked off the court amid allegations of drug ties. He fled to the U.S., cooperated with the DEA.
And what did he say?
He claimed he'd been forced to acquit an army commander linked to cocaine. And he implicated other high-ranking military figures, including a former defense minister.
And the Hezbollah link, that sounds geopolitically explosive.
It does. There have been long-standing allegations about links between the Venezuelan government, particularly under Chavez and the Maduro, and Hezbollah, the Iran-backed group in Lebanon.
What kind of links?
Suggestions that Iranian-operated sites might have been used to move drugs, possibly to the Middle East. This could serve two purposes: bypassing international sanctions on Iran and generating funds for arms, potentially for Hezbollah or other groups. A former New York DA, Robert Morgenthau, publicly stated he believed cocaine seized in New York was linked to a Venezuela-Iran-Hezbollah connection aimed at funding weapons programs. It paints a picture of drug trafficking intertwined with much larger geopolitical agendas and alliances.
Okay, so given all this context, the deep state involvement alleged, the geopolitical angles, how did the U.S. response evolve? It seems like it ramped up significantly beyond just chasing drug boats.
Oh, it escalated dramatically. It shifted clearly from standard law enforcement towards a full-spectrum pressure campaign. A key moment was March 2020.
What happened then?
Then Attorney General William Barr announced federal narco-terrorism charges against Maduro himself and over a dozen other top Venezuelan officials.
Narco-terrorism, that's a heady charge.
Absolutely. Barr accused them of conspiring with the FARC to flood the U.S. with cocaine, calling it a health war. And they put a huge price on Maduro's head, a $15 million bounty for information leading to his arrest.
$15 million?
Then, after Maduro's inauguration for a third term in January 2025, an election the U.S. didn't recognize, they upped the bounty to $25 million. Frame it as solidarity with the Venezuelan people and maintaining maximum pressure.
And it didn't stop there.
Nope. By August 2025, it doubled again, $15 million bounty. The new Attorney General Pam Bondi flat out accused Maduro of working with multiple cartels, called him a threat to national security.
$50 million. That's regime change territory, essentially.
It certainly signals that. And alongside the bounty increase, Bondi announced they'd seized about $700 million in assets linked to Maduro in his Circle luxury homes, private jets, cash. She didn't just call his government corrupt. She called it an organized crime operation. The strategy became very clear: legal pressure, financial strangulation, public condemnation, and incentivizing his removal.
How did Maduro respond to all this? The charges, the massive bounties?
Predictably, with defiance and outrage. He consistently slammed it all as crude political propaganda, a ridiculous and cheap show, pure imperialist actions by the U.S.
Did he engage with the charges at all?
Not really on the substance. He went on national TV and basically dared the U.S. president at the time to try and arrest him, warning it could mean the end of the American empire. His ministers echoed that, mocking the accusations, trying to link them to unrelated U.S. political issues, framing it all as an attack on Venezuela's sovereignty. So you have this cycle of accusation and defiant dismissal deepening the rift.
So pulling back again, these very aggressive interdiction efforts, including those kinetic strikes we started with, they really seem like just one tool in a much bigger toolbox aimed at Venezuela.
That's exactly right. They're not just about stopping drugs, though that's the justification. Targeting Venezuelan vessels, especially in such a forceful way, is a direct projection of U.S. power. It's calculated to squeeze the Maduro regime.
How does it squeeze them?
By disrupting commerce, maybe drugs, maybe oil, maybe other things. It makes it risky and expensive for Venezuela to use the sea lanes. This creates economic pain, adds to internal instability, potentially weakens Maduro's grip.
And maintains a U.S. presence.
Yes. It allows the U.S. to keep ships, planes, intelligence assets heavily deployed in the region, all under the relatively uncontroversial banner of fighting crime. It perfectly fits that hybrid warfare model we discussed, using a blend of military, economic, diplomatic, and information pressure to achieve political goals short of open war. The war on drugs becomes a very useful, very flexible instrument of statecraft in this context.
Which brings us back to maybe the most critical question. Does it actually work? Do these kinetic strikes, this aggressive interdiction, do they actually disrupt sophisticated drug networks in the long run, or are there unintended consequences we need to consider?
The Hydra's heads problem.
Yeah.
It's the classic dilemma. You cut off one head, two more grow back. And yes, there's often an illusion of disruption, especially right after a big strike or seizure.
Like in that coastal town you mentioned.
Exactly. We heard about this anonymous post describing a village completely paralyzed by fear after the first U.S. strikes hit local boats. Fishermen, terrified to go out. Immediate economic devastation for the small guys. So yes, the initial impact on low-level operators, on desperate people like Julio, can be severe. It creates chaos.
But the big networks, the sophisticated ones,
They adapt. And they adapt incredibly quickly. That's the key. They ditch the easily spotted fishing boats. They move to semi-submersibles, basically homemade submarines, which are incredibly hard to detect.
wow.
They use modified shipping containers that blend in with legitimate traffic. They shift routes overland through neighboring countries, just moving the problem elsewhere. So the strikes, celebrated as these big wins, they might have mostly just taken out the desperate amateurs, the small fry.
Effectively clearing the field for the major cartels, making it easier for them by removing competition.
That's a very real and very concerning possibility. It points to a major pitfall of what's called high-value targeting, or HVT.
Targeting the kingpins, the leaders.
Right, taking out the top bosses. It became popular, thinking back to successes against big hierarchical groups like the Medellin and Cali cartels in Colombia years ago. And in counterterrorism, against groups like Al-Qaeda, it seemed logical. Remove the head, and the body dies.
And it was seen as better than crop eradication?
Yeah, crop eradication was often a disaster, just alienating poor farmers. So HVT looked like a cleaner, more targeted approach.
But our research suggests it doesn't always work so well against today's more decentralized criminal groups.
You're absolutely right. Especially in places like Mexico, HVT has often backfired. When the government took out the leaders of major cartels, the organizations didn't collapse. They fractured
Splinter.
into smaller, often more violent factions. These splinters then fought brutal turf wars against each other, leading to a massive increase in violence, not a decrease in drug flow.
Why can they replace leaders so easily?
Drug trafficking organizations, compared to, say, ideological insurgent groups, often have a deeper pool of potential leaders. The required skills might be more about business and ruthlessness than unique charisma or ideology. So when a leader falls, someone else, often younger and maybe even more violent, steps up quickly.
So just hitting the top guys without a deeper strategy?
Can just create chaos, market turmoil, bloody succession struggles, power vacuums that other groups rush to fill. And the communities caught in the middle suffer terribly from the increased violence and instability.
This sounds exactly like that balloon effect you described earlier. Squeeze it here, it pops up over there.
Precisely. The balloon effect is textbook drug policy reality. You disrupt routes in the Caribbean, traffickers shift to Mexico, you crack down on production in Peru, it increases in Colombia. The drugs keep flowing because the demand remains and the market adapts.
And the side effects can be nasty.
Absolutely. Violence spreads to new areas. Corruption follows the money. Health problems like addiction can pop up in previously unaffected regions. The drug market truly behaves like a resilient system. It has this incredible ability to absorb shocks and find new ways to operate. Trying to just suppress supply in one spot rarely works long term. It's like trying to dam one channel of a river. The water will just find other ways downstream.
So if these kinetic strikes, the HVT approach, the whole hammer strategy, isn't really working or is even counterproductive, what are the main problems with it and what else could be done?
Well, the core problem with the hammer, just focusing on seizures, arrests, body counts, the volume of crime, is that it often misses the bigger picture. It doesn't necessarily reduce the actual harms of the drug trade.
The violence, the corruption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The things that really destroy communities and undermine the state. As we discussed, this approach can even backfire by taking out the least competent criminals, leaving the smarter, tougher, better connected ones in charge. That's the opposite of what you want.
So what's the alternative? You mentioned targeting the middle layer earlier.
Right. Some research and experiences in places like Italy fighting the mafia suggest that focusing on the middle tier can be more effective in the long run.
The managers, the facilitators.
Exactly. The people who connect the top bosses to the street-level operations. The logistics guys, the enforcers, the money launderers. If you can dismantle that operational core, arrest a lot of them simultaneously, it can seriously disrupt the whole network. It limits the leadership's ability to regenerate, cripples operations, and maybe even yields intelligence or testimony against the top guys through plea deals.
Sounds logical, but difficult.
Incredibly difficult, especially where corruption is rampant. Middle layer targeting requires patient, long-term intelligence gathering, building complex network maps. And that makes it super vulnerable to leaks, to compromised officials tipping people off. It's much easier, politically and operationally, to get quick results with a drone strike based on signal intelligence, even if it's less effective long-term.
We saw problems with targeting in Afghanistan too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Interdiction efforts there often got manipulated by local warlords. They'd feed intelligence to international forces to get them to take out their rivals, often just small-time opium traders, not the big players. This actually helped groups like the Taliban consolidate control over the drug trade by offering protection. And sometimes, selective interdiction just became indiscriminate, seizing opium that was basically a poor farmer's life savings, pushing people towards the insurgency.
And the risk of trained units going rogue in places like West Africa.
That's another huge danger. You invest in training specialized anti-drug units, but if oversight is weak, they could become powerful criminal enterprises themselves, or even use their skills for political coups. Aid money can get diverted. It's fraught with risk if the institutional context isn't strong.
So it really has to be tailored, strategic, not just opportunistic hits.
Precisely. You need deep analysis of the specific threat, the specific context. The goal shouldn't just be racking up arrests or seizures incapacitation, but enhancing deterrence, making the whole system riskier and less profitable to operate, and maybe shifting the focus.
Shifting how?
Thinking about minimizing the harms of crime, not just the incidents of crime. That means prioritizing the most violent actors, the ones corrupting judges or politicians, the ones building parallel power structures in communities, trying to make crime less destructive, even if you can't eliminate it entirely.
That links back to the idea of the drug market being resilient. How has that concept shaped policy thinking? It sounds a bit defeatist.
It can be interpreted that way, and that's a major criticism. The resilience paradigm, the idea that drug supply and demand are just phenomena we have to live with, that they can't be eradicated, has definitely shifted focus in some circles. Instead of aiming for social transformation to eliminate the root causes, the focus becomes adaptation.
Just coping.
Essentially, yeah. Helping societies and governments cope with threats and upheavals, rather than overcome them. This can lead to what some critics call a passive and depoliticized approach. Human suffering gets reframed. Well, sometimes it's framed almost as an opportunity for learning and self-growth. Think about groups like Los Buscadores in Mexico, the searching mothers digging for their missing children in mass graves because the justice system has failed them. Their incredible strength is resilience, yes, but it's resilience born of state failure. The paradigm can sometimes subtly shift the burden onto victims and communities to just adapt.
And the critics say this lets the system off the hook.
Exactly. Critics argue it ignores the deep historical roots of the violence and insecurity. Things like massive social inequality, damaging economic policies, weak or corrupt institutions. Instead of tackling those fundamental problems, the focus on resilience can inadvertently allow them to persist, while vulnerable communities are just expected to absorb the trauma and find ways to cope. It's a real debate. Should policy focus on helping people endure a bad situation or on fundamentally changing the situation itself?
So we started with a single dramatic video clip, a kinetic strike at sea, and we've unraveled it into this incredibly complex knot of international law, shifting geopolitical strategies, the adaptability of criminal networks, and the devastating human costs.
Yeah, it really snowballed.
What really stands out is how blurry the lines become between law enforcement and military action, between counter-narcotics and strategic pressure, between a targeted strike and an act that could be seen as warfare.
The gray zone is vast.
It really is. And it reminds us that every explosion, every intercepted boat, every decision made in this high-stakes environment has ripples, consequences that go far beyond the immediate incident, shaping international relations and impacting real lives in ways that are often profound and sometimes only truly understood much later.